Welcome to the Chess Angle. This is not your typical chess podcast. If you're an amateur or club-level player, the Chess Angle is for you. Our content is aimed at busy adults who are serious about the game but have limited study time. Featured guests include both amateur and titled players alike. And now, here's your host, director of the Long Island Chess Club, Neil Bellon.
Welcome, everyone. My guest this week is David MacEnulty. David is a renowned scholastic chess coach, educator, and author. His chess teams have won numerous city, state, and national chess championships. He is perhaps best known for his work at Community Elementary School number 70 in the Bronx, here in New York. David was portrayed by actor Ted Danson in the 2005 TV film Knights of the South Bronx. He won the Chess Educator of the Year award from the University of Texas at Dallas in 2007, the Career Achievement and Scholastic Service Awards by U.S. Chess, and the Lives That Make a Difference award from A&E Television. David has an upcoming book titled Sunrise in the Bronx, which details his experience working at CES 70. So, David, welcome to the podcast. It's an honor to speak with you.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about what's been going on lately. So the book, Sunrise in the Bronx, maybe you could tell us what inspired you to write it and when we can expect it to be available.
Well, I've been told that I should write about my experiences in the Bronx for many, many years. And finally, I decided to go ahead and do it. And fortunately, I had taken copious notes at the time that I was teaching in the Bronx, which was roughly the year 1991 to 2000. So my wife said, really, people have been pestering you to write this thing. Get off your tush and do it. So I finally got around to writing it. And it was, I must say, it was really exciting to relive all of those years and reconnect with all of the different things that happened in those times, because that was really the most rewarding time of my entire life. It was also the most challenging and the most difficult, but hands down the most rewarding.
And what's been happening lately? I know you're kind of retired from teaching chess, but what's been going on? Do you still kind of have your toe in the water with it? Like what's exactly been happening as far as your chess teaching and chess involvement lately?
I would say toe in the water is a very good description.
Okay.
I'm not fully immersed. Every once in a while, someone calls and wants me to do something, and I'm more than happy to do it because I really believe that chess is a life-altering activity for kids, and anything I can do to support anybody who's doing that, I'm all in for it. So when somebody calls and asks me to do something, I'm ready to go. But mostly, I'm just reading and doing photography.
Okay, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I actually started doing the photography when my children were born, so I could document their activities. And then when I was teaching in the Bronx, I wanted to document all of the things that the kids in the Bronx were doing at their chess tournaments. So I've been doing photography for a long time, but now that I've retired, I actually have time to take it much more seriously. And so I'm doing landscapes and animals and the occasional model and things like that. It's just a wonderful, wonderful way to reinvent myself and find yet another activity in this highly eclectic life I've had.
Let's jump back a little bit.
Yes.
I want to talk about Bruce Pandolfini and your relationship. So I'm hoping you can kind of maybe tell us how you met Bruce and how that led you into chess teaching.
That's an interesting question. Bruce and I have talked about this several times. We cannot remember how we met. I know that's kind of strange, but I don't remember. I do remember getting a chess lesson or two from him once. And then he asked me to teach a class for him because he couldn't make it. And as I say in the book, I thought he must be crazy because all of his guys were masters and I was just somebody who liked to play chess. But he was desperate and he convinced me to do it. So I taught the class after he told me what to do. Then he asked me to do it again, and it was great fun. I never crossed my mind that I would like to be a teacher. I was in my mid-40s at that point. Then he asked me to quit my job in real estate and come work for him at the American Chess Foundation, teaching chess to Title I schools. So that was how I became a chess teacher.
Yeah, and I like his quote. You put a quote of his in the book: "When playing a lower-rated player, play to win. When playing a higher-rated player, play to win."
Absolutely. Yes. You're always playing to win.
And what about Sylvia Simon? She was very prominent in the book. She was the principal who I believe added chess
Yes.
to the curriculum. So I was hoping you could tell us about your relationship with Sylvia and her role in your program.
Well, Sylvia was amazing. When I was working for the American Chess Foundation, which later became Chess in the Schools, one of the schools that I was assigned to was Sylvia's school, CES 70 in the Bronx. And IBM had a special relationship with that district that year, which allowed me to go to them once a week for the full year. Normally, our program, in those days, you would only go to a school for 5 or 6 times. But I went to Sylvia's school every week for the full year. And at the end of the year, the kids ended up placing 13th in the nation in one of the lower sections. And Sylvia called me into her office and said, "I've been watching you. I like the way you talk to the kids. You don't talk down to them. You show them respect. How would you like to quit your job with the foundation, get certified as a Board of Ed teacher, and come teach chess in my school?" Sylvia had just an amazing insight into the idea that chess would be transformational for the kids in her school. And she was right. And I had the very serious obligation of proving that she would be right, because that was purely speculative. No one had ever done that in the Board of Ed before. So Sylvia was a genius. She was God's gift to education.
Wow, that's fascinating. Now, speaking of your background,
yes,
you've been kind of all over the map. Very eclectic background, right? Music, theater, construction, real estate.
Yes.
Kind of a circuitous path, I guess, to where you got. Now, tell me about, it said you were a professional actor in New York for 10 years.
Yes.
Yeah. Tell me about that.
Well, my life has been completely serendipitous all the way through. When I was an undergraduate, I was studying philosophy, and I read in the school newspaper that there were auditions for a play at that moment that I was reading it in the coffee shop. So I went over to the theater to watch an audition because I had no idea what they were like. And at the end of running through all of the people in the audition who were going to audition, the person directing said, "Are there any more men who would like to audition?" And suddenly I found the floor to be very, very interesting. I made no eye contact with him at all. And then I heard him say again, "Are there any more men who would like to audition?" And this time the voice was a lot closer. And then I heard him say it yet again. And this time the voice was from right beside me. And he was putting a book in my face. And so I went up and I auditioned and got a part. And so the next thing I knew, I was no longer a philosophy student. I was a theater student. And I loved it. It was great fun. But it was a complete accident that I got into theater, just as it was a complete accident that I got into teaching. I finished my undergraduate work in theater. And then I went to graduate school. And then I got a job at Actors Theater in Louisville for a year. Then I came to New York and was a professional actor for about 10 years. And then I hit on an idea that I wanted to write about. So I stopped doing the acting, and I was doing the research for the writing, which was going to be a crime series, documentary. And I found that to be absolutely fascinating. The police let me ride with them. I went to visit the jails. I had a friend who was an assistant prosecutor in the DA's office. So I got thoroughly immersed in that. And little by little, I stopped acting and I started doing more writing. And then I needed to support myself from my writing. So I took a part-time job in a real estate office, and they kept firing the people above me and giving me more and more to do. And eventually I was the director of sales. And then the market tanked. This was 1987. And I realized that sales was not a good place to be. So I moved over into building management. So that's sort of the accidental framework of my life until I became a teacher.
I'm going to have to listen to that back again just to kind of process all that.
I know
but no, that's wild. Now let me go back. When you were acting, was it like more serious, like Shakespeare stuff, musical theater? Like what kind of things were you doing?
It was mainly stage. I've done about 10 Shakespeare plays.
Okay. All right. Yeah. The reason I'm at, because I was thinking it's got to be Shakespeare because you've got the voice, right? You've got that voice. Like I wouldn't make it with my Long Island twang. I don't think I would make it as a Shakespearean actor, David. But anyway,
there's room for everybody in Shakespeare,
right? I know they'll find some, like a modern interpretation or something, right? Now you also have a background in music, which personally for me, I'm very interested in because by day I'm a middle school music teacher. That's my vocation. I was a band director for many years. Now I'm teaching classroom music, just mixing it up. But you played bass trombone. Yes. Oh, thank you. Yes. You played bass trombone in a Navy band. Now, just the fact that it's low brass, because
Right.
we always need that bottom.
Right.
So
Yes.
you're getting extra brownie points for that.
Thank you.
But yeah, when did you start playing trombone? And then tell me about that whole, how that worked out.
Okay. In my high school band was absolutely amazing. We had a brilliant director. He made us one of the top bands in the entire country. So I played the baritone in those days. For those who don't know it, a baritone is like a tenor tuba. And in orchestral transcriptions, the baritone plays the cello parts. So that was what I did mostly through high school. And then I realized that if I was going to be a professional musician, as my parents were and my brother became, playing the baritone wasn't going to do it. I needed to switch to the trombone, which is more of an orchestral instrument. So then I decided that I would switch to the bass trombone because there were fewer of them. And it's a lot of fun to play. So when I finished high school, the question was, do I really want to be a professional musician? And so I thought I would try it out by being a musician in the Navy, joined the Navy right out of high school, which, as it turns out, was one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. I got out of the Navy in 1965, just as Vietnam was blowing up. So I was already a vet with a discharge when that calamity happened.
All right. What was that like playing in the Navy band? What was that like?
It was wonderful. It was a 17-piece dance band, and we played parades, of course, and military functions. But we also played dance band at the officers' clubs at night. And you have a lot of freedom as a musician. There's a tremendous amount of free time. So I read voraciously. It was a wonderful time, and I got to we spent a year in the Mediterranean. I had a year of sea duty on various aircraft carriers. It was an exciting time.
Let's kind of make a little bit of a right turn. Let's kind of go back to chess a little bit.
Yes.
Because there's definitely a lot of things I want to get to. So when you were younger at some point, when you got serious, you read Nimzovich's book, My System, correct?
Yes.
So tell me about the impact that book had on you and what you got out of it.
It had a huge impact on me because I hadn't really studied chess very much. I had Lasker's manual when I was a kid. My father was a fairly good player for an amateur. He was probably, expert level, which isn't much in professional circles, but it's really great for a man on the street. So, I grew up with, hearing about Botvinnik and Petrosian and Tal. So it was sort of by osmosis. I was in the sort of the low level of chess culture. But I had a friend that I used to play chess with a lot, and I would regularly beat him maybe 4 or 5 games out of 7. And then he started winning. He started winning more games, and he had secretly read My System. So when he told me that, I thought, okay, I'm going to get that book too. So I read it and I caught up with him. And then I thought, well, let me do it again. So I read it twice. And of course, you don't just read Nimzovich. You have to study it. You have to really do it. You got to get the boards out and look at it. So that was a major turning point in my chess education. And then he started beating me again. And I said, all right, what book did you get this time? And it turned out to be Ludek Paklin's series, his 3-part series on chess. So I got that, and I started reading that as well. So that was really my chess education prior to when Bruce asked me to become a chess teacher.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a great motivator. If you have a friend you're kind of sparring with and he keeps beating you, it's like, all right, I need to.
Yes.
Nothing will motivate you like that, right? The good old male ego.
Yes. Yeah.
And then it was also suggested that you get Chernev's book, 1000 Best Short Games of Chess.
Yes.
And you had a comment in the book. For those listening, David was kind enough to send me a manuscript to look at. And you talk about how short games, by definition, are filled with instructive errors.
Yes.
And as a result, you can learn from that. I was hoping you could just kind of tell me about that a little bit.
Well, when kids first started playing chess, they don't know a lot about opening principles. They know almost nothing about specific openings. And so to get across the idea of how you should play the opening, seeing mistakes that people make is a really good way to learn. Zanosko Swarovski wrote this wonderful book, How Not to Play Chess, which turned out to actually be a book on how to play chess. Showing the mistakes in these games, in these short games, the kids see what you should not do. And that helps guide them in what they should do. So I found that book to be invaluable as a teaching tool.
Going back to your time at CES 70, I know you competed. I mean, again, you were at a school with, very few resources, Title I school. You're competing against schools such as Hunter, Dalton, Columbia, Trinity, all these private schools,
right?
All of which had, top coaches and top resources.
Yeah, those guys were amazing.
Yeah, I'd love to hear, I guess, that juxtaposition. Like, what was that like when, your kids were facing those schools?
I had to go into it slowly. I didn't want to let them just jump into the deep end of the pool right at once. We played a few matches with some of the local schools in the Bronx, but that wasn't real competition. So to get them ready to face places like Dalton and Hunter, PS9, Trinity, all those wonderful, wonderful schools, I had to prepare them for the fact that we're going to get smashed in the beginning, and that losing is how you get better. And if you haven't failed, you haven't tried. So don't worry about winning and losing. Go in there and let's see what those kids know. Write your moves down. We'll see what they knew that we didn't know. And then we can go back and I can prepare you for the next time. And little by little, it was working. But it took a lot of preparation to get them to understand that losing is not a definition of who you are. Losing just shows you what you need to work on. And when they got that under their belts, when they really understood that as a working philosophy, that's when we could really make progress. So they would make mistakes. We'd fix those. Then they'd make more mistakes and we'd fix those, and they'd make more mistakes and we'd fix those. And eventually they started winning.
Yeah. I mean, that's fascinating that you were able to, as a teacher myself, because we know with kids, it's all about the result. Like,
yes.
It's like you either win or you failed. But the fact that you were able to get them, like in the beginning, it was almost like, okay, you have to look at these tournaments almost like it's a reconnaissance mission. Like we're just
exactly,
we're getting all the information, and that, losing is part of the deal. I even tell like a lot of adults who are getting into chess now, adult improvers, they'll come to the club. Oh, I never played. And I tell them, I go, you're probably going to lose a lot of games at first, but I go, that's your initiation. That's just how it goes.
Right.
But for you to convey that, to elementary school kids, and for them to understand that, that's pretty remarkable.
Well, I had a great history of failing a lot of things in my own life.
Right. Well, you fail forward, right? That's now the new.
Yes.
In education now, they have all these new, expressions now. So now they call it fail forward. That's
okay. Yes.
That's the trendy term for that. No, but
okay.
Very good. So you have something in the book that you call MacEnulty's 9 laws, which are really your guiding principles. And I just want to discuss a few of them. I'll mention a few and maybe you could speak about them. So one is work harder and more efficiently than the competition.
Well, that's crucial. I mean, you look at anybody who is really successful, and it's not that they're smarter, although many times they are. It really is the amount of work you put in and how efficiently you're working. I've known chess players who have studied chess like crazy for years and years and years, and they make very limited progress, if any, because they don't know how to study. They're inefficient with the way they're studying. And so what I had to do was find very efficient ways to get the kids to understand some of the basic concepts of chess and then the more complicated concepts of chess. But it began with just simple patterns, learning checkmate patterns, learning tactical patterns. And then eventually you can go into some middle game ideas, open files and pawn structures and things like that. But it's little by little, and it's incremental learning. And, once they understand that this is a long-term process, we're going to learn this, and then we're going to learn that, and then we're going to learn this, and then we're going to learn that. And eventually they look back and they learned a lot. I remember I went to a chess tournament once where Bent Larson was playing, and he won the tournament. And afterwards, he was asked 2 questions by the person giving him his big trophy and his check. One was, how do you get better at chess? And Larson's answer was very simple. He said, learn one thing really well, then learn another thing really well, then learn another thing really well, and then learn another thing really well. And you keep doing that, and eventually you've got a long list of things that you've learned really well. So that was my philosophy in working with the kids. We're going to learn one thing really well, say pins or tack or forks or simple thing, even knife forks. We're going to spend a lot of time on knife forks because it turns out there are 6 different patterns for a knife fork. Until I broke it down and started looking at it, that had never crossed my mind.
Right. And what you said before about how a lot of people study but don't get better. Right. I think it's because of what you said there. It's almost like a multitasking type of thing. They're getting all these books and, focus on one book, focus on one concept, like you said. But I think they try to do too many things at once. And so they're learning several things superficially rather than one thing, substantially.
The other question that the fellow asked Bent Larson was, is it better to know principles or to know specific openings? And he said, well, if you're only going to know one, know the principles, but you better know them both.
Yeah. Right. Great answer.
Yes. Yeah. Well, he was a great player.
Yeah, absolutely. So your next one, and I'm curious how you sort of taught this to the kids, was to develop a warrior mentality.
Among the many things that I did, I was a college wrestler and I did judo in the Navy. And, I studied a lot of Zen ideas and martial arts. And the idea of the warrior is something that's very appealing to me. But I differentiate between the warrior and the bully and the brute. The bully and the brute are not warriors. They're out to do damage just for the hell of doing damage. They want to destroy something. The warrior wants to conquer with dignity and ethics. I really believe that a firm ethical understanding is essential for anything that a person does. Chess, music, anything, business. If you don't have ethics, you're an inferior human being in my mind. And so to me, the warrior is someone who is a master of some form of fighting. In our case, it's chess. Chess is, after all, a war game. And the warrior is someone who is nimble, someone who can adapt, someone who can take whatever is in front of them and figure out the best way forward to accomplish the goal. To me, that's the ideal warrior. If you look at a movie like The Seven Samurai, there's one of the opening scenes is this samurai who's got to rescue a child from inside a building that someone has taken inside this house. And what he does is he turns himself into a monk. He shaves his head and he's going to bring the bowl of rice in as a monk. He's transformed himself. He's adapted to that situation. He has figured out how to use his skills to accomplish the goal, which in this case was saving the child. So he goes in as a monk and comes out as a warrior. It's being able to adapt to whatever's in front of you. But I really strongly differentiate between that and the person who's just trying to win any way they can. The people who say winning isn't everything, it's the only thing, I have no sympathy for that.
And the warrior mentality, how did you convey that to the kids?
It's not easy because you have to combat so many different mindsets, and each individual child is going to bring a different way of looking at the world. And to get all these disparate mindsets, and bear in mind, we're talking about very small children. We're talking about, 6, 7, 8-year-olds. To get them to understand the flexibility required and the discipline required, it's really just getting them to understand what the goal is in chess. The goal is to make your best move each and every time. And sometimes that's going to work really well for you. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes the other person knows more. Sometimes the other person's better focused. If you have a lapse in focus, that's what you need to work on. If they have an understanding of some aspect of chess, say open files that you didn't, that's what you need to work on. But that's all it is. It's something we need to work on. And the more we work on it, the better we get, and the more like the warrior we become.
And I want to end with this one. As far as the 9 laws, I just kind of picked a few. One is about you taking personal responsibility for everything. The buck stops here.
Yes, absolutely. If you're in charge of something, you are responsible for absolutely everything that happens. If somebody doesn't know something because you didn't teach it, that's your fault, not theirs. I remember I had a student once who was locked in a fabulously tough game at the national tournament. And it came down to a queen ending. And I hadn't told him this very basic idea in a queen ending, when you both have queens on the board, and there were pawns all over the place. Centralize your queen. I didn't tell him that. He didn't know. Well, his opponent didn't know either. They went on for a long time, and eventually the game was a draw. But it wasn't his fault. It was mine. I hadn't trained him for that particular situation. Whatever the problem is, it's if it doesn't go well, it's my fault. If it does go well, they did it. And that, I think, was really important, to give them credit for doing what they were supposed to be doing, not to run around saying how wonderful I was because I prepared them the right way. Let the kids have their credit. And by the way, also, I'm not that strong a player. So I had a lot of phenomenal people working for me. Grandmaster Moran Scher, Taggian, Joe Lux, Gerald Times, Steve Colding. The list is huge. And I apologize to all of those who I did not mention. I was very, very clear in giving them credit for what the kids did, because they are the ones who did it. And, I'm responsible for getting them there. And if I don't have the right coaches, that's my fault.
And you also had some sponsors along the way that supported you financially.
Yes. If it weren't for the generosity of thousands, literally thousands of people, those kids from the Bronx would never have gone anywhere. I mean, we couldn't go anywhere. We couldn't afford plane tickets. We couldn't even afford entry fees to Dalton and Hunter and Browning. And, we couldn't have done any of those things if it hadn't been for the patrons. Patronage really is what makes the world go round in the arts world.
Now, I want to go back to music a little bit.
Yes.
Because you say something in the book that really, struck a chord with me personally about, and correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but your band director when you were younger kind of taught rhythms first before you even touched your instruments.
Yes.
So he wanted to make sure that you had those patterns down before you transferred it onto your instrument. And then you took that same philosophy with chess. You touched on that a little bit, but I'm just wondering what that approach looked like as far as getting the mechanics in place first before taking it to the next step.
Yeah, the mechanics are so crucial. Bruce Lee famously said, without technique, there can be no art. My first training as a musician was pure technique. As you said, how do the rhythms work? What's the difference between 6/8 and 3/4 time? How do you emphasize a note? What's syncopation? All these different things. You have to know those things when you're playing an instrument. And in chess, you have to know, well, take it really simple. You have to know the names of the squares. You have to know the patterns for knight forks. You have to know the patterns of queen and knight checkmates. You have to know the patterns for queen and bishop checkmates. You have to know the patterns for two queens doing a checkmate. There are thousands and thousands of patterns. And so my feeling was, in music, there's a very clear process for establishing the sequence of patterns that you learn. And so what I wanted to do was find that same sequence in chess. We're going back to 1990, 91. There weren't a whole lot of books that dealt with really super basic stuff. So I had to develop all of this on my own. So I came up with this system of a progressive system of learning techniques, making it very progressive and interconnected. So that was really how I applied my music training to developing a curriculum for chess.
And a lot of these kids, they didn't even have the experience to understand even basic things. Like you had something about explaining what a corner is. You're talking about the corner of a chessboard.
Yes.
I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that sort of, not language, but that experiential barrier and how you handled that.
Yeah, that came about when I was teaching a second grade class, and I taught all of the pieces, and now we're going to set them up on the board. And I asked the class who could come up and put a rook in the corner of the board. And nobody in the second grade class even had the slightest idea of what a corner was. They had no working definition of that word. And I realized then that I had not been doing what a teacher should do. I had not been starting where they were. I had not given them a working vocabulary that we all shared. And so that was when I completely revamped my system. And by the way, this was only after I'd been teaching for a few weeks. So I didn't really have a system.
Yeah, right.
But that was when I began with the idea that I've got to start where they are, which is very, very basic. What I came up with was trying to find the simplest idea in chess. And that idea, is, as I saw it then, was what is a straight line? Because the board is made up of squares, which are made up of straight lines. All the pieces move in straight lines, and even the knight move can be described as two straight lines connected by a right angle. So that was when I began a whole new foray into educational theory. How do you reach kids who have absolutely no connection with whatever it is that you're doing? So we had to establish a framework, a set of language, a set of things that we could communicate with and be clearly understood by one another. So ranks, files, diagonals, naming the squares, learning the alphanumeric grid of the chessboard was the beginning. And once you've got that in place, then you can plug the pieces in easily.
Yeah. And if that's not in place, anything else you teach is just they're not going to be able to process it.
Right. They're not going to process it in a way that is communicable.
No, fascinating. And they went from that to, winning national championships. I mean, it's quite remarkable. Now, speaking of the tournaments, yes. I was sort of half blown away and half disturbed by the chapter you have on cheating and intimidation, like what you faced.
Yes.
And these are scholastic tournaments. I mean, we're not talking about like, Magnus and, what's his name?
Neiman.
Yeah. Magnus and Neiman. This is like, these are like, young kids. I mean,
right.
They're what, like 6, 7, 8, 9 years old.
Yep.
And the examples that you mentioned now, of course, as most people listening know, nowadays, coaches and parents are not allowed in the playing hall.
Right.
And,
right.
And as a side note, just the fact that that's a pretty standard rule now doesn't really paint a pretty picture of our current society. The fact that they actually have to have that in place. But
yes.
the cheating that went on, the kids, the coaches, and the parents, it really just blew my mind. I mean, I knew it was out there. I had no idea you dealt with it to the extent that you did until I read your manuscript. Now, a couple of things I want to ask you about that. So first, you trained the kids to deal with bullies and intimidators. So what did you tell them?
Well, I tried to make it really clear that we need to know what's going to happen to us. Now, don't go in there expecting this, but if it does happen, be aware of the fact that this can happen. People can cheat. People will cheat. The touch move rule is the most flagrant violation of the rules. A kid picks up a piece and then claims not to have touched it because that's going to be a bad move. When I first started encountering these things, I began wondering, how do we fix this? And it became clear that I had to understand all the different patterns for cheating. And once I understood those patterns, then I could explain to the kids what might happen. And if it does, this is how you handle it. The one thing that I did that I'm really very proud of is that I told them that you must know how cheating works, but you absolutely must not do it. This is to prepare you for the people who don't know how to behave. This is not to teach you how to misbehave. If you're the one doing the cheating, we're going to have to fix that because I don't want anybody on my team doing that kind of stuff. I like to say that none of my students would ever go to work for Enron.
Yeah.
No, I'm a really big, as a philosophy student, ethics was my area of concern. And that's really been pervasive throughout my entire life. So I wanted to make sure they understood how other people will do it, but under no circumstances should they do it. And
you kind of told them that if they were being intimidated at the board, just to kind of laugh at them and they're doing it because they're afraid of you.
Yes. The intimidation techniques that some kids came up with were really quite impressive.
Can you give us one example?
I think my favorite one was, actually, it's a whole bunch of them. Somebody would come in and say, my father's a grandmaster, I'm going to beat you. Or I'm the state champion, I hope you don't cry when you lose. But then they would do things like ask questions, they would ask math questions. They would ask geography questions. They would do anything to make you feel stupid.
And these kids are how old? These kids are how old again?
Oh, I saw that even in the first grade.
So like a 6-year-old.
6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds. Now, interestingly, I didn't go to very many junior high tournaments because I taught mainly elementary. But I did go to one once many years ago when I was teaching at Dalton. And I was absolutely astonished at the difference between the junior high tournaments and the elementary tournaments. By junior high, the kids had gotten all that nonsense out of their system. In 2 national tournaments, I saw absolutely no evidence anywhere of anyone doing any of that kind of stuff. It seems to be something that the younger kids try, and then when it doesn't work, they've sort of got it weeded out of their system by the time they get to junior high. I hope that's true. I don't have enough data to really know that that's the case.
Right, but that was your experience at the time.
That was my experience, yes.
And there was one incident where you actually had to walk out of the tournament because an opponent of one of your students was making vulgar comments to a female child, and apparently the tournament director didn't do anything. Like, how did that go down?
Well, it depends on who you ask.
Well, I'm gonna take your word for it.
The girl's mother, she was only in the 3rd grade, and she was playing against a boy who must have been in the 6th or 7th grade. And he was just saying obscene things to her. And the mother came and told me about it. And so I went over, and the tournament had actually just started at that point. So I went into the tournament room and wanted to deal with this. And as I walked up, I could see the boy actually saying something to the girl, but I couldn't tell what it was because I was too far away. But she was looking very stressed. And at that point, the tournament director for that section came over to me and told me I had to leave because the tournament was underway. And I said, well, yes, but I've got a problem. That boy is saying vulgar things to my student. And he said, you have to leave. And I said, no, you don't understand. This boy is saying vulgar things to my student. And he said, well, that boy is my student. And so I thought, well, in that case, this can't be the first time he's done such a thing. So I said, well, then you know that I'm telling the truth because this can't be the first time he's been vulgar. And he told me that I had to leave. And at that point I said, certainly. And I raised my voice really loud. Now, bear in mind, the tournament has actually just started. And I asked all the kids from my team to stand up and come over. And so my whole team stood up from the boards where they were playing and came over to where I was. And I said, we're leaving. And we marched out. That created a little bit of a disruption in the tournament, of course. You know, I could not let my girl be subjected to that kind of abuse. And that tournament director was just being, I thought, completely ridiculous. So we left. And then the person who ran the tournament, who was actually a priest, came over and tried to mollify me, but I was having none of that. I said, I'm sorry. Your tournament director is allowing his student to say vulgar things to my girl. That's not going to go. And we never went back to that tournament.
That's awful. That is absolutely...
It was horrible.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, I don't blame you. I would have done the same thing, but the way it was handled is just it goes to show you that these things happen. And what a shame. What else can you do if they're not going to handle it? What else are you going to do except leave?
Yeah. Well, I also wanted to make a statement.
Right. Absolutely.
I wanted to make it really clear that this was not going to fly.
And then there was another situation. You spoke of your student, Garrett, who was playing someone where the father was helping his opponent cheat. So tell us about that one.
Well, this was at a national tournament. The players were all in this large area, of course, and they had roped off the section. And my student, Garrett, was sitting at the edge. So the spectator 5 feet away on the other side of the rope could see the game. And the boy, his son, would put his hand over a piece and just let it hover there and then look at his father. And if his father shook his head yes, he would make the move with that piece. If his father said no, shook his head negatively, the guy would withdraw his hand and look for something better. And, you know, one of my parents had seen this happen and she came over and told me about it. And I came over and I was watching it and I saw it happen. So I got a tournament director over and he, wearing his tournament director vest, stands right beside the guy. And so, of course, that didn't happen. You know, the kid put his hand up and looked over at the father, and the father's sitting there like Mount Rushmore. He's not moving.
You need to step away and look from a distance because obviously if you're standing right there, you know he's not going to do it.
Completely, yes. But, you know, as I say in the book, I don't expect tournament directors to be adept at surveillance techniques, but, you know, there needs to be better training.
And the problem is, too, like the touch move rule you mentioned, because I know you dealt a lot. What ends up happening is the guilty person ends up, you know, getting his or her way. Because the rule is, for those of you who may not know, if your opponent claims let's say you claim your opponent touched a piece, he can simply, if there's no witness, he can just deny it because the rule is
and they do.
Yeah. And because I've seen that a few times, even at our club, even with adults, where
Sure.
it's like, I just know I've been doing this long enough. I know the person's guilty. And I'm thinking like, you are such a liar. I know you touched the piece. Okay. I know you,
right.
But I'm bound by the U.S. Chess Federation rules. And if there's no witness, if it's he said, or he said, she said, I have to,
right.
Because it's better to uphold, it's better to deny a true claim than to uphold a false one. That's like the standard. But
right.
I mean, it's just
yes.
really, really frustrating. And then you saw there was another incident where a coach helped his student cheat. The student would write the move down and then he would kind of push this score sheet so the coach could see it. Is that right?
Yes. This was a team from Arizona. They had clipboards because with a clipboard, you can maneuver it much more easily than you can with just a bare sheet of paper. If he had just a plain sheet of paper down and he lifts it up and holds it out to the side, that's rather obvious. But if it's on a clipboard, he can be just looking at it casually, and that allows the coach to see the move. And this was the same sort of thing as with the parent with Garrett. If the coach didn't like the move, he would shake his head no, and the kid would scratch it out. They didn't erase it. They scratched it out and then go on and make a different move. And that happened over and over again. And the team won the tournament.
That is crazy. Wow. I mean, it almost sounds like, when you read it in a book or something, it's like almost, but the fact that it actually, I can't even imagine what that must be like to have to deal with that.
It was very frustrating because we should have won that tournament. We came in second.
And I guess there's really no recourse because I guess once the result is written down, that's pretty much.
No, there was nothing we could do. I mean, we reported it to a tournament director. He came over and confronted the guy, and the guy said, no, that's not what happened. And, a scratch out on a score sheet is not proof.
Well, let's talk about some good news, like when you won the national championship and you went to the White House, you met President Clinton and the First Lady, and Clinton says, I would like to welcome and pay special tribute to 4 young people who are in the audience today from the chess team of CES 70 in the Bronx. They are this year's National Elementary School Chess Champions. So tell us about that experience at the White House.
Well, that was just extraordinary. That was a special event. It was a science event where President Clinton had invited Neil deGrasse Tyson, one of the great astrophysicists, and Marcia McNutt, who was the head of the Monterey Bay Aquarium. So he had there one of the world's leading experts in deep space exploration and one of the world's experts in deep sea exploration. And so it was really an event to honor science and technology. So the audience had Nobel Prize laureates, astronauts, and professors, all sorts of really high-profile people. And so for these 4 kids from the Bronx to be recognized in that crowd, it was just such an incredible high to be in the East Wing of the White House and have the president acknowledge your triumph. That was a very high high.
No, that's amazing. I can't imagine. That must have been amazing. Good for you. Now, congratulations. I'd like to do one more segment if that's okay, David.
Sure.
I want to talk about, and we'll end with this, The Knights of the South Bronx, the 2005 television film. I'm guessing many of you listening have seen it, but it is based on David's experience. So do you know how that came to be? Like, what caused them to approach you and say, we want to make a movie about your story?
Yes. Actually, that's a very interesting story. CBS did a chess piece on us, and CNN also did a piece on us. And the reporter for CNN was this magnificent woman, Perry Peltz. And Perry had a friend, Diane Nabatoff, who was a Hollywood producer. And Diane was talking with Perry once about how she couldn't find a good story. And this was after CNN had done the story on us. And so Perry said, well, I have a good story for you. And she told her about my team in the Bronx. And Diane was really taken with the idea. And so we had a breakfast meeting where I sat down and explained all the different kinds of things that we did in the South Bronx with these kids and who these kids were. They're from the highest crime precincts in the Bronx, the poorest congressional district in the United States, the highest rate of STDs in the country. It's, just about every economic and political and social strike against them. And they became national champions. Diane thought this was a great idea. And so she wanted to make a movie out of it. And she hired a professor at Columbia in drama, who, as it turned out, was one of the youngest of the Black Panthers back in his day. And he had spent some time in jail, but was now a Columbia professor. And so I wanted to meet him, I think, even more than he wanted to meet me. But we had many, many long conversations where I talked about what we had done in the Bronx. He said, okay, we're going to tell a truth. It's not going to be the historic truth. We're going to have to take what you did in 8 years and put it into 1 year. He said, the truth we're going to tell is that somebody came to the South Bronx and taught these children how to believe in themselves through the medium of chess. Chess is going to be the transformative thing for these kids. That's the story we're going to tell. We're not going to tell it the way it actually happened.
Yeah, well, that's Hollywood, right?
That's Hollywood, yes. As we like to say, Hollywood doesn't let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Yeah. Right, there you go.
I got to work with Ted Danson extensively, for weeks. We talked and talked and talked, and I showed him the different ideas and things that we had done. And then the kids who are going to be the children in the movie, the actors, didn't know how to play chess. So I had to teach them how you hold the pieces and, what it's like. Yeah,
I was going to ask you about that. What was that like, teaching the child actors how to play?
It was fun. They were really good. Kiki Palmer was amazing. The whole group, they were really responsive. They did beautifully. I was really impressed with them.
All right. And what was Ted Danson like? Because I would have been like, dude, I'm hanging out with Sam Malone, like from, it's the bartender from Cheers. No, was he cool? Because sometimes with these Hollywood actors, like you hear stories. It was all good.
He was amazing. He was so generous with his time. He was so friendly. He was so warm. He was so understanding, empathetic. I can't say enough good things about him. He's the real thing. He's just an extraordinary man. By the way, unknown to many people, he's also really a heavy-duty environmentalist, and he wrote a phenomenal book on oceans called, what is it called? This is embarrassing. I can't remember the name of the book.
No, that's all right. Well, I can look it up. I can look it up and link it.
But it's an extraordinary book where he talks about the what's happening in our oceans from an ecological point of view, and it's really well written. It's scientifically valid. I mean, he worked with Marshall McNutt at the Monterey Bay Aquarium and people like that. I mean, he really delved into it. But the real point of that is that he is just an extraordinary man.
That's terrific. I didn't know that. That's great to hear, and I didn't know about the book. I'll put that information in the show notes. Now, were you on the set a lot during the filming, or was it kind of just a one-shot deal? Like, were you there?
No, I was there. I was there several times. I was not there for some shots, but I was there for many of them. The thing that involved group activities, like when he does the simul, I was there for that.
Did you actually do a simul, or did they throw that in there?
I have never done a simul at that level. I've done simuls at chess camps all the time, but that's with kids who don't know very much about chess. They made me a much better chess player than I really am.
And then you had the cameo at the end, right? Like in the award ceremony, the person who announces the winner, that was you.
That was me, yes. Yeah, that was Diane's little gift to me.
I'm just curious, was that done in a day? Like, how many takes did you have to do? What was that process like?
We had to do the shot. I don't know. I think we did 3 or 4 takes.
Okay.
But none of them were because of me.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was fun.
David, I think I'm going to end here. This was absolutely fascinating. I really enjoyed it. Just an amazing background. You've had an amazing career. What you did with those kids is just tremendous. And the book is titled Sunrise in the Bronx, right? Now, is that a working title, or are you sticking with that?
That's working title, and the publisher has not told me that they want to change it, so we may stick with it.
Okay, and when is that due to be released?
I'm not sure. It's being New in Chess is the intended publisher. I'm expecting the final contract any day now, and the plan is either May or September of next year. I don't know which. That's the plan, but these things are constantly in fluctuation, so I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, New in Chess is big, so congratulations. That's yeah.
No, I'm very excited about working with them. They're wonderful.
All right. And when it comes out, I'll definitely mention it on
you.
the podcast. I'll put a link for it out. No, absolutely. It was a great honor to speak with you. So really appreciate it. And for those of you listening at home, as always, I hope you win your next game. Have a great day, everyone.